Rosalind, we're at 7:01 if you want to get started.
Okay, wonderful. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us tonight on Zoom for this very important town hall meeting. The Northeast Ohio chapter of the Climate Reality Project is honored to be joined by Ohio State Representative Kent Smith tonight. Tonight, he will discuss the policies and controversies behind Ohio's House Bill 6, as well as current goings-on in Columbus. And then we'll end with some discussion about opportunities for transitioning to a clean energy future for Ohio. So during the discussion tonight, please ensure that your screens and your microphone, not your screens, your microphones are on mute when Representative Smith has the floor. And then also after the discussion, we will launch a poll for you to participate in. And then time permitting, we will also have Representative Smith answer some questions sent in by our audience. So thank you very much. Just wanted to also let you know that Climate Reality will be setting up a link in our chat where you can access to learn more about our organization, as well as joining a chapter, whether in Ohio or anywhere in the nation. So let me introduce State Representative Kent Smith. He was first elected to the 8th Ohio House District in 2014 and has since tirelessly served Ohio with re-elections in both 2016 and 2018. He joined the Ohio House after serving Euclid, Ohio as a member of the Euclid Board of Education from 2002 to 2013. In his 12 years on the Euclid School Board, Representative Smith never missed a meeting. I would say he's a true Iron Man there. Mr. Smith graduated from Miami University in 1988 and has earned his Master of Science in Urban Studies from the Cleveland State University in 2001. His master's degree thesis, written in 2001, was about the emerging threat of predatory lending and subprime markets. He also co-authored the first predatory lending report by Policy Matters Ohio in 2002. Following his master's degree studies, he was a PhD student in economic development at CSU. In his current 2019-2020 term in the Ohio House, he is the ranking member on the Public Utilities Committee. He also serves on the Financial Institutions and Commerce and Labor Committees. He has served as the ranking member on the Economic and Workforce Development Committee and the Financial Institutions and Housing and Urban Development Committee as well. In 2017, he was one of 3 Ohio State reps and one of 37 overall to receive a fellowship for the 2017 Bohe Institute for Legislative Leadership Development conducted by the Council of State Governments at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. Since 2019, Representative Smith has served on the advisory board for Rust Belt Rising, where he is a resident economic expert. Additionally, he is an active member of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, serving as the current state lead for Ohio, a role he previously occupied in 2018 as well. Representative Smith also serves on the Multi-State International Great Lakes Legislative Caucus. In his life away from the legislature, he is a roller derby announcer, having announced for the Cleveland Burning River Roller Derby team since 2008, as well as the Chicago outfit since 2010. And speaking of Chicago in 2013, Representative Smith attended the Climate Reality Training with Al Gore in Chicago, which brings him to us here tonight. So Representative Smith, welcome and thank you for joining us.
I am happy to be here. Can you all hear me? Look for some sort of affirmative nod that I am being heard or comment. All right, so yeah, so the reason for that introduction was just to give me a little bit of credibility, because essentially I am now kind of a politician appearing before scientists, and you're going to ask me questions about science and legislation, and that can be a dangerous place for someone like myself to tread. So I want to make some introductory remarks just about, you know, clean energy and green energy and that kind of thing, and then get into some of the dynamic that's going on in Columbus, talk about House Bill 6, talk briefly about where the repeal efforts are at this point, and also highlight, I think, 5 other issues that I think would be important for this group to hear. But let me say that, let me do a quick commercial for the Climate Reality project. So the work of the legislature is really done in committees. We get about 1,300 pieces of legislation introduced every General Assembly. In the Ohio House, I want to say we have 17 different committees. I serve on 3 of those. In the past, I've served on 4. But I'm the ranking Democrat on public utilities, and an awful lot of the energy generation legislation comes through Public Utilities Committee. I also serve on financial institutions. My master's degree thesis in predatory lending was mentioned. So I'm one of the Democrats that's got some expertise in banking policy, and so it's good for me to be there. And then I also serve in commerce and labor. So when legislation gets introduced, obviously it gets assigned to a committee. It's got to make it through a committee. If it's voted out favorably from the committee, it'll go to the House floor, where it might or might not get a vote, and then it would go over to the Senate. So again, it's just like the Saturday morning cartoon. I'm just Bill here on Capitol Hill. But in that respect, I've really got to become a policy expert in the committees that I serve on. And I've got to trust my Democratic colleagues to be expert in the bills that are going through those committees. Because again, there's just too much legislation for us to kind of stay on top of all of it. So if for some reason you wanted to play Stump the Legislator, I'm sure you would win with that tonight. The advantage that I have is I can always say, let me get back to you, and I can get back to you. But in the notion of let me get back to you, let me say that, again, well, I was going to do a commercial for the Climate Reality project that I went to. So I wanted to be involved in the clean energy discussions. And I thought that if I won in 2014, I wanted to try to put myself on committees where these kind of issues would be talked about for the good of Ohio. And the the Climate Reality training that I went to in Chicago was very helpful in giving me some of the policy knowledge that I needed, and even some of the state-specific knowledge that I needed to try to move Ohio to a cleaner, greener future. And I've been on public utilities all 3 terms. I'm in my 3rd term, and I'm currently the ranking Democrat. So let me make some comments just about kind of my overall philosophy for the economy and how the clean energy economy factors into it. Then I'll talk about the specific circumstances that we find ourselves in Columbus, and then get into some of the details on House Bill 6. So one of the things that I would say is Ohio does 2 things really well. We feed the world and we build things. And it's the Ohio middle class that does both of those. And those are some principles that are grounded in my PhD studies in economic development. But I'd like to bring forth a concept that I heard either in my master's program or my PhD program, because I remember which professor said it to me, but I can't remember when I heard it. And it was a Japanese term of sunrise industries and sunset industries. The Japanese use these 2 terms to describe a growing economic sector versus a declining economic sector. We all know that economies and markets change. All we have to do is look backwards to see that. But we want to be where the economy is growing. You don't want to have your region dominated or your state dominated by sunset industries. Sunset industries can sometimes look like industry leaders, but that can sometimes lead to a more dramatic fall. The notion is it can be very dominated. It can be very dangerous to be dominated by a business that has an increasing share of a declining market. The example that I often use is we see that with buggy whips as opposed to as a way of creating horsepower as opposed when automobiles began taking more and more of the personal transportation market. In other words, the last maker of buggy whips probably was the best maker of buggy whips, but in the end, they were getting an increasing share of a declining market. And so that would be an example of a sunrise versus sunset industry. Quite frankly, the electric vehicle space versus gas combustion engines is an example of sunrise and sunset industries right now that is frankly much more relevant to Ohio and why all of us are interested in these clean energy policies. Another thing to look at is just the lesson of the Fortune 500 list, which is to say, if you were to look at the Fortune 500 list now and you were to look at it 30 years ago, you might only see about 50% of the same names. Again, that's just that the economy moves, the economy transitions. And we want to be, in Ohio, we want to be making sure that we're building our future economy on sunrise industries, and clean energy and electric vehicles are clearly some of those. The need for electricity and water will not decrease as the world population continues to expand. The economic opportunity of renewable power generation, a more flexible power grid, and clean water are a huge economic opportunity. These markets should be pursued, not shunned. For example, if you just look at Ohio in terms of our Midwest neighbors, in terms of wind energy, you'll see our Midwest neighbors, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Indiana, are generating about 3 times to 4 times as much wind power wattage than we are. And the wind industry actually believes that Ohio has the ability to generate about 10 times the wind capacity than we're currently producing. And if you think about our wind industry, our industry-specific wind energy parts and components, that's about $3 to $4 billion worth of paychecks that are not being cashed in Ohio. And that's what I mean by something that's an expanding market, because that expanding market would in turn create employment growth. And again, now we're getting back to the middle class and the notion that that's the most important part of a healthy economy. Even though probably a lot of you know this, I'm going to quote some Bureau of Labor statistics information. Bureau of Labor Stats has 2 of the biggest job growth occupations in the next 10 years will be the wind turbine tech and solar panel installer. A 2019 study published in the journal Nature reported that the U.S. green economy is estimated to represent about $1.3 trillion in annual sales revenue and employs about 9.5 million workers, and those numbers have increased 20% in about the last 8 years. And again, if you look at other sectors of the economy, nothing's growing at 20%. So again, if you think about the Fortune 500 list and what the lesson is of that, I think it's fairly clear that the clean energy market is in fact a sunrise industry and can power Ohio's future Fortune 500 list. All right, so that's that's sort of from a philosophical standpoint how I approach an awful lot of the economic policy in Columbus. Now let's talk about what specifically is going on in Columbus over the last month. Basically, what I would say is unchecked one-party rule has created a Republican culture of corruption in Columbus. We work for you, we the General Assembly work for you, and we shouldn't be working for corporate special interests. There are ongoing investigations into alleged criminal activity regarding the and those investigations question the legitimacy of House Bill 6, and that bill must be repealed. Special interests and crooked politicians shouldn't benefit at the expense of taxpayers. That's why the Democrats have introduced House Bill 738, introduced by Representatives O'Brien and somebody else who I'm blanking out on right now. Oh, crud, who was it? I don't know. Could have been Leland, could have been Rogers. It wasn't Rogers. Anyway, could be Weinstein. Anyway, so we must get rid of House Bill 6 and have some real conversations about the state's economic future. I think all but one Democrat has signed on as a co-sponsor. I have signed on. And initially, we had signed on to a House Bill 6 repeal that was being put forth by Republicans. But many of us, including myself, have removed their names as co-sponsors following an email, and this is important, sent to the entire House on July 23rd by Representative Bill Seitz, who's a Republican from Cincinnati. He was discouraging, which discouraged us to support such members, such efforts, at least coming from the Republican caucus. House Democrats are willing to work with Republicans on a good faith House Bill 6 repeal, but we're currently concerned about. So we've got our Speaker of the House worked out, but we're not sure who's going to be on his leadership team. There are two members of the leadership team currently that were part of the householder team, Bill Seitz and Anthony DeVitas, who've taken tons of money from First Energy. I actually sent an email, a text to one of my Republican colleagues asking him if the leadership team was set yet, and it has not been set. We're also concerned about banning dark money and bringing real transparency to see who is influencing our elections. Democrats have introduced the Ohio Anti-Corruption Act, which is House Bill 739, which is Sweeney and Russo. I've signed on to be a co-sponsor of that as well. It's an anti-corruption legislation that would require dark money groups to identify their funders, to disclose their spending. It also strengthens restrictions against foreign corporations and governments from influencing Ohio elections. Dark money groups have influenced state policy for years, but by making people and their corporations making their names behind the organizations disclose their contributions, we can begin to bring some transparency and accountability back to state government. Quite frankly, the Ohio Anti-Corruption Act closes some loopholes that are currently allowing big money special interests to hide their spending by requiring these groups to disclose contributions as a means to influence the elections. The integrity of our democracy and our governance model in the state of Ohio and Columbus depends on openness and accountability and transparency. And both the House Bill 6 repeal and the Ohio anti-corruption legislation would be welcome additions to the process. So that is, and again, I can go into greater detail on that, but I wanted to touch on House Bill 6 because obviously it has been passed. And so the question with a House Bill 6 repeal is, what do you have to repeal? And that sort of depends on when the repeal takes shape. So there's sort of two different parts to House Bill 6. One is money for the two nuclear plants, and then there is money for the two coal plants. Well, the OVEC, so one of the bills, one of the coal plants is called OVEC, OVEC, and that the charges affecting the OVEC plant have already started to take hold. So House Bill 6 expanded those charges from what was the OVEC service area to statewide. So we are now all paying for the OVEC plant and the plant in Indiana. But unlike the OVEC charges, which have already taken hold, the clean air credits, in other words, the nuclear plants, won't begin until January 2021, and those First Energy won't begin receiving those subsidies until April 2021. So depending on when you repeal House Bill 6, that is a part of, are you just repealing, can you stop charges that are currently taking effect, and when does that happen? So that's a little bit of when, just how House Bill 6 has currently been implemented since it's been passed and signed into law about a year ago. Let me touch on, so there's a House Bill 6 repeal in the Senate also. That is Senate Bill 346. It has bipartisan support. It's got 17 senators that have already come on board as co-sponsors. 17 is significant because there's only 33 senators. So if you just quickly do the math, 17 is enough to carry that legislation over the edge right now. As I mentioned, there's a Democratic repeal in the House. That's House Bill 738. There's a Republican repeal that has yet to get filed officially, and I don't think we've seen the language. That is being sponsored by Lanice and Greenspan, who were both no votes on the original House Bill 6. And so on 738, the Democratic legislation that's already been introduced, there's 41 co-sponsors. Again, you need 50 votes. The Senate, again, has 17 co-sponsors, and you need 17 votes. So perhaps the best road to appeal will actually be initially through the Senate. Now, again, you just never know how these things are going to unfold. It is the House that is, our leadership structure is currently completely up in the air. Bob Cupp, former Supreme Court Justice, former state senator, is the new Speaker of the House as of 5 days ago. His leadership team has not yet been put together. There are significant rumors about who's going to be a part of it. But if Bill Seitz is a part of the leadership team, if Anthony DeVitis is a part of the leadership team, then First Energy's influence is still going to be very prominent on. So the leadership, both the Democratic leadership and Republican leadership in the House, are on the 14th floor of the Reif Center. So sometimes we just kind of will shrug our shoulders and say something to the effect of, well, we got to figure out what 14th wants. And what that means is we got to figure out what the leadership team wants. So it's going to be very interesting to see who Bob Cupp puts on his leadership team. Bob Cupp has called for an HB6 repeal. Representative Cupp was a yes vote for House Bill 6, was not a mover and shaker per se in the process. That really was Larry Householder and Bill Seitz. And so, since Cupp has already said that House Bill 6 needs to be repealed and has said so publicly, I think you got to take him at his word for that. But again, it'll be interesting to see which one of these pieces of legislation makes it through the chamber first. But I also want to just let you know where we are in terms of a timetable. So currently, and forgive me, I don't know what the Ohio State Senate's calendar is, but in the House, we're not scheduled to return until like week 2 and week 3 in September. And those session dates are as needed. So we're at the will of the Speaker. Now, since Bob Cupp is now the Speaker of the House, he can call us back anytime and he can give us 48 hours notice. But the general thought is that, this is the time when all of us usually head back out into our communities and we all try to get reelected. So, aside from those as needed sessions in September, we weren't coming back. We weren't scheduled to come back until after the election. Now, I got to be honest with you. After the election is always a very dangerous time in Columbus. That's the lame duck period. Some of the worst public policy that you can imagine has been passed during the lame duck period. It'll begin the week after the election, and we will probably get the week of Thanksgiving off. But in last year's, in the lame duck period, that would have been 2018, so the most recent lame duck, we were there. We didn't get a break. We only got a break the week of Thanksgiving. We were there Christmas week. We were there New Year's week. And it was a very, very busy time. So that I wanted to share that just to say that even though Ohio is a full-time legislature, and there's 7 state legislatures in the country that are full-time, the calendar is a curious one right now because we're just not scheduled to meet. I do think that Senate Bill 346, the bipartisan effort in the Senate, looks like it's got more momentum than anything in the House. But if it makes it through the Senate and comes over to the House, there's no guarantee that the House will take it up. So that's kind of where I wanted to leave it. I will say very quickly that there are 5 issues that I think this group should be paying attention to. And they are House Bill 246, House Bill 247, the electric vehicles issue, the icebreaker, which is the wind turbines going up on Lake Erie, and something called the Green Amendment. Very quickly, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. House Bill 246 and House Bill 247 are in Public Utilities Committee. These were considered the second and third giveaways to the public utility sector. House Bill 6 was the first one. 246 and 247 were the next pieces of legislation. Again, $60 million doesn't buy you just one piece of legislation. House Bill 246 would change the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, which generally makes all the kind of detail-oriented decision on power generation. And it was also going to change the Ohio Consumers Council, which is one of the more effective bodies in protecting Ohio consumers. House Bill 247 was going to expand the 4 investor-owned utilities' ability to compete in consumer markets that currently they can't compete in. And I could go into some bloody detail on both of those fights, but I just wanted you to know that, again, as the ranking Democrat on public utilities, what I was hearing was, you know, look, the utilities were going to get 3 things under the householder leadership. They were going to get House Bill 6, and then they were going to get 246 and 247. As of right now, you know, they've got House Bill 6. It might get repealed, but we need to be on our guard to make sure that 246 and 247 don't get passed into law. Electric vehicles. So in this General Assembly and in the past General Assembly, I have introduced the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Study Commission legislation just to help Ohio begin to transition from a gasoline-powered industry to an electric vehicle automotive sector. That legislation is in Transportation Committee. It is House Bill 202. It has bipartisan support, but it has been stalled, no pun intended, by the Republican leadership on 14. In other words, the Republican chairman of the Transportation Committee told me that it had the votes, he would pass it out, but 14 had put the brakes on it. Again, no automotive pun intended. So again, if Ohio is going to move their automotive sector, House Bill 202 and other electric vehicle type of legislation is critical. And again, because of the change in leadership in the House on the Republican side, we might have the opportunity to move 202. But again, we're still up against the calendar. Now, I'll be honest with you, I will introduce this legislation again, and hopefully we can get it through in the next General Assembly. But, you know, that's another public policy space that this group should pay attention to. Okay, 2 more things, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. The Icebreaker project, which is the wind turbines going up in Lake Erie. This has had strong support from Northeast Ohio. It's had strong support from local elected leaders in Northeast Ohio. And just recently, I want to say in the last month, the head of the PUCO, Public Utilities Commission in Ohio, there was DeWine appointed, a guy named Sam Randazzo, who's now the chair of the PUCO. Randazzo put a stop to the Icebreaker project by mandating that it could not operate during from dusk to dawn, or at least, you know, the nighttime hours. Concern about birds. Now this is it's BS to be quite simple. And we, the Northeast Ohio delegation and the Cuyahoga County delegation, and quite frankly, even some Republicans, Dave Greenspan, Matt Dolan in the Senate, are working to try to get the PUCO to reconsider. Quite frankly, the wind turbines going up in Lake Erie will not happen if they can't operate at night. They've got to be able to operate 24/7 just to recoup the investment they've made. So that is something you should be watching. Sam Randazzo is a DeWine appointee. Mike DeWine is not really good on clean energy issues. He's taken a lot of money from First Energy. He's got First Energy advocates in his kind of kitchen cabinet. And this is something, and so throughout all of this, DeWine is a pressure point. It's not just the Ohio House, it's the Ohio House, the Ohio Senate, and DeWine. But the Icebreaker Project is one of those that needs some attention, because if this project fails because the DeWine appointed head of the PUCO kills it, it would be a real travesty. And finally, the Green Amendment. This was something I was working on with Tavia Golansky, and then the House Bill 6 indictments happened. I'll show you a book. The Green Amendment. This is written by Maya Van Rossum. Securing Our Right to a Healthy Environment. So there are 5 states that have passed a Green Amendment. Basically, it kind of guarantees the generational right to clean air, clean water. It's actually in the Pennsylvania Constitution. It's being introduced in West Virginia, Montana, Pennsylvania. It's in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. There's one other state, and I couldn't remember, but I'm pretty sure it's got 5 states that are working on it. Quite frankly, Representative Golansky and I were meeting with some of the national leadership on proposing a Green Amendment, but I don't think we're going to go forward with it right now because the House Bill 6 fight is too important, and we don't want to distract from that. So, but the Green Amendment is something that, again, it would be great if we could get some environmental activists to get behind it once it gets introduced. I've got no timetable at all on it right now. We still needed to do some legwork in Ohio before we were, so it would literally be a constitutional amendment that, if it was passed by the Ohio legislature, would appear on the ballot, and Ohioans could vote on whether or not they wanted some, some healthy environment language in their state constitution. So those are the 5 other issues I wanted to get to. Hopefully I've touched on some of what brought you here with the House Bill 6 issues and some of my kind of theoretical underpinnings as to why I'm in the General Assembly. And with that, it is 7:33. We have 27 minutes for questions. Have at it.
Before we jump to questions, I just wanted to say that Andrea is going to launch a poll for folks to participate in. We just wanted to have somewhat of an understanding and assess our participants tonight. So Andrea's going to launch a poll, and if you all could participate in that, that would be great. And then while she's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Representative Smith a question. So you've addressed a lot about more transparency, as well as how do we deal with kind of the special interest dark money. In terms of long-term considerations for Ohio legislators, when you are looking to create and fund energy projects, how do you assess greenhouse gas emissions, climate change impacts, public health risks, and things of that sort? How do those decisions kind of come into play, or do they at all?
That question would probably be better asked to someone who voted for House Bill 6. Because for me, and again, so one of the things that's very interesting about the House Bill 6 fight is it's not like this is the first time we've had this fight. So we are currently in the 133rd General Assembly. So the General Assembly of 2017, 2018 was the 132nd, and before that the 131st, etc. The next one will be starting January 1st will be the 134th. So I've been there the 131st, 132nd, 133rd. I'll be back for the 134th. We've had the House Bill fight in other General Assemblies. It's just First Energy cut a deal with Larry Householder that this was going to be core to his speakership. And even though we picked up more Democrats, we went from 33 Democrats to 38 Democrats. We weren't able to stop the House Bill 6 train when it got on the tracks. So again, so how do I evaluate it? I mean, for me, the climate crisis is a very real public consideration. But again, I'm grounded in my PhD studies in economic development. The notion that sunrise industries and sunset industries are very real. The notion that the clean energy sector is one of the fastest growing sectors in terms of jobs that would pay a healthy living wage and are growing. So I think it is mystifying to me that Republicans can't get behind solar and wind. And it is literally because First Energy has so much money that they're able to throw in elections that, quite frankly, they're able to buy votes. And if you can get 80% of the Democratic caucus, if you can get 80% of the Republican caucus, if you can get 90% of the Republican caucus, and anything you want is going to pass. And if you can pick off one or two Democrats, and again, there's some of my Democratic colleagues that arguably have good reason to support House Bill 6. And let me just say, if you represent the Davis-Besse plant in Toledo and you're interested in getting reelected, you should probably vote for House Bill 6. If you have part of Lake County in your district, you're going to have to think long and hard. And again, some of the folks who supported House Bill 6 were Democrats that were very close. First Energy is headquartered in Akron. They're a political behemoth in Akron. You got to think long and hard about that. So quite frankly, it's First Energy's strength as a political player in Columbus is the major consideration for whether or not this type of legislation gets passed.
Andrea?
Sorry,
Andrea,
I had to unmute. So question for Representative Smith. What would be your biggest vision for how citizens can have an impact in this moment to get the chips to fall in favor of positive action on climate change?
Well, we've got to, the House Bill 6 repeal is something that we need to do. And then we need to start putting pressure on, so it's going to be, you're going to have to put pressure on the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and the Governor. And we don't know we think the next President of the Senate is going to be a guy named Matt Huffman, because Larry Obhoff of the Medina area is term limited out. Again, Mike DeWine has not shown himself to be a really strong advocate of clean green energy, but you got to partner with the business sector, because that's part of how we got Kasich to not want to stand up for the House Bill 6, for the latest First Energy bailout, was there was an awful lot of kind of big tech folks that got in Kasich's ear, Google, Facebook, those kind of folks. And they were like, look, we want clean energy in Ohio. And there's also the natural gas plants. Again, the fracking, the shale rock, allows natural gas plants to produce electricity at a much less expensive rate per kilowatt hour. And again, that's the House Bill 6 fight. It's just one of the most curious battles that I've seen in Columbus, because you saw things like the Ohio Industry Council, the Manufacturers Association, line up as strong opponents to the bill because they knew that this would just drive up their power generation costs. So it's a very interesting, there's a lot of partnerships that were made kind of um, a lot of partners were created that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be created. Um, so I would say you've got to look for any advocate you can find, and probably the only advocate that you shouldn't go seeking are the 4 investor-owned utilities who want to continue to reap profits from their from the power generation that they built in the previous century. They're not interested in investing money in new power generation because they can still make money on these old dinosaurs from a past age. But you can weigh in. You can try to support Senate Bill 346 in the Senate. You can try to support House Bill 738 in the House. You could. And again, some of it is, who do you even email? I know that right now you email Larry Obhoff in the Senate, you email Bob Cupp in the House, and you email Mike DeWine in the governor's office. You also, I think you want to advocate for, you got to watch to see how 246 and 247 move in lame duck, if they move at all, which again are the second and third gifts to the investor-owned utilities. But you should weigh in with the governor's office on the icebreaker project, the wind turbines in Lake Erie. That is something that's kind of clearly in his court. It's not really in the legislature's court. But yeah, those are some immediate things that could certainly use your attention in Columbus.
So we had one follow-up question to that, which is, what is the best way for us to get attention right now in this time of COVID? You mentioned emailing. Is there anything else that we should be doing?
Email is great. Postcards are great. If somebody wanted to have a postcard party, and again, kind of mail postcards to DeWine, Bob Cupp, and Larry Obhoff. So because again, those are the decision makers, at least for the next 5 months of the 133rd General Assembly. And again, the advantage of a postcard could be is you could sort of, and trust me, this is something that's, you could kind of highlight a variety of things in the postcard, I guess is my point. You could say, look, I want to repeal House Bill 6. I want to make sure that wind turbines can be built in Lake Erie. I want to make sure House Bill 246 and 247 are not enacted into law, and want to move Ohio towards the emerging clean energy sector. I'm not trying to write your postcard for you per se, but I will say this, and I know my staff are on the call or on this, just in case I say anything really ridiculous. They can reprimand me after it's over. But and again, COVID has kind of changed this a little bit. We're now working from home a lot more. It's a lot harder for us to get our mail. But I've actually got a cat right next to me. I'm waiting to see if the cat's going to Zoom bomb me and walk in front of the camera. But I actually read every email that comes through my office. I read every piece of mail that comes through my office. I don't know if I'm the only member of the General Assembly that does that, but emails and postcards and those kind of things can make a difference, especially if they sort of come in volume. Now, I'll be honest with you, and again, my staff will vouch for this. If we get 7 emails that say the exact same thing, I'm not reading all 7. I'm reading one, and they're paper clipped and a little note that says, we've gotten 7 of these, and I will write a response to it, and then we send it out 7 times. So if you were to make it, if you were to, write your own postcard, it's probably going to get a little bit more attention. But again, the key that I'm trying to drive home is don't just, and I would say mail it also to your state rep and state senator who represents you, just to keep them in the loop. If any of you are in my House district, I'd love to get a postcard from you. But the key is, again, you're sending 3 of these. you're setting the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, Mike DeWine, because all three of those, forces that create legislation have to be on the same page, and they're all probably equally important.
Great, thank you.
So Representative Smith, as you've mentioned, the cost for wind energy as well as solar is coming down now to the point where it is more cost effective than many of the fossil fuel based energy productions, a lot of which we still have in Ohio. You also mentioned that jobs are growing, and probably the largest sector that's growing is in these areas. So how can we possibly begin to direct maybe some of these bailout funds or other funding to large-scale reskill training for folks who are unemployed right now, especially as kind of, to underpin that growing renewable energy sector that is emerging?
Yeah, well, you could run for the state house, and I would co-sponsor that legislation. Yeah, I mean, we need some forward-minded policies that'll again create jobs that can sustain a family and produce a middle-class wage, and the clean energy sector. It's again, part of what I did in my introductory remarks, I mean, some of that was literally from a floor speech that I gave, where I was just kind of like, we're talking about $4 billion of Ohio paychecks that aren't being cashed because we've stifled the wind energy industry with this ridiculous setback law. And again, that's, that could be a whole other, Zoom call. So let me say this. This is research that I actually found from the Climate Reality website. For those of you who don't know, the 4 largest states in terms of wind power are all states that voted for Donald Trump in the last in 2016. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Iowa. None of those are bastions of democratic thought, and so if Republican leadership in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Iowa can embrace the notion that wind power is somehow good for their economy and good for their energy portfolio, it literally just is the amount of money that the 4 investor-owned utilities have pumped into state government that is keeping this economic sector from getting a foothold in Columbus. So it's a good time for righteous indignation and anger. But yeah, it's, and again, some of it is that we need to continue to introduce legislation to try to, focus the debate, which is again one of the reasons why I've introduced the electric vehicle legislation. Is the automotive sector is currently it's very strong in Ohio. Probably most Ohioans actually know someone who works in the automotive industry. So again, the notion of helping them move from gas-powered engines to battery charging and electric vehicles, I thought was a good way to make the economic argument and just force people to kind of come to grips with it.
Thank you. Andrea, do you have a question?
Rosalind, why don't you go ahead with another one? I have a little technical difficulty right here.
Okay. The EPA requires Clean Power Plan compliance for public and policymakers to inform about impacts of electricity generation and potential health, environmental, and equity co-benefits. So how is Ohio designing compliance and to ensure disproportionate burdens are not placed on low income and communities of color?
So yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm just going to punt because that's something that I could check with my staff and try to get an answer on. But I mean, that's essentially a compliance issue. So the legislature wouldn't necessarily have a part in that per se. I will say, and here I'll hold up my Green New Deal mug. The best thing, Vice President Biden has said he's introduced, a variety of Build Back Better economic policies, and he's in his energy generation, roadmap. He said that he wants to go move to 100% renewable energy by 2035. One of the reasons why our automotive emissions are now higher in terms of climate crisis emissions rather than power plants is because the Obama administration was able to take coal plants offline with the Mercury rule. So know that if we get a new president, Ohio will inevitably get greener if President Biden is able to push some federal policies through. And Ohio is so gerrymandered in the legislature, even though we were, basically a 51-49 in terms of votes. The Ohio House is 61-38 because the GOP was so good at carving out Republican districts that had, 54% of the district was Republican, and they compacted the Democratic vote. I could look into the compliance issue if you want to send me an email. By the way, here, I'll give everybody my email, and this will make my staff very angry. You can email anyone in the Ohio legislature with this simple little email address, which is REP, the word rep, and then the number at ohiohouse.gov. So I am rep, REP 08. So everybody that's 1 through 9 is 01, 05, 08, up to 9, and then everybody else is double digits, 10, 38, whatever they happen to be. So you now know how to email Bob Cupp, because I think he's Rep 04. Now check the state directory. I don't know if you can email the Senate the same way. My guess is there is a way, but I'm not in the Senate, so I don't secretly know that. But let me just tell you this: we've gotten legislation to weaken compliance. In fact, we even have it right now. One of the last pieces of legislation that the Public Utilities Commission heard before the COVID outbreak was a piece of legislation by Representative Wiggum to allow municipal water systems to basically allow municipal to take away the Ohio EPA ability to make them clean up for like secondary matter. And again, basically it was like, if your water smells bad, who cares? I mean, that was the practical ramification of the bill. And so we get bad environmental legislation like that introduced. Now, again, I don't know if that legislation is going to move. I didn't put it on my 5 things to look out for because I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but it could. So anyway, in regards to the EPA compliance, I don't have a direct answer, but I would tell you that we get bad compliance legislation like we get bad legislation on anything.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes before the end. Steve, did you want to tell folks more about how they can learn about our chapter as well as Climate Reality Project?
Sure, absolutely. 7:55, we've got a few minutes. Representative Smith, I just want to say, hey, thanks so much. We'd love to have you on again and do this as we talked about at first. But this is terrific. We're glad to have not just our chapter, which is Northeast Ohio, but we've got people representing both Dayton and the Columbus chapters as well. And then there's other people from around the state here that I see too. So a good start, I hope, and hopefully we'll do more of this kind of thing. But anyway, if you're I didn't see the poll results, but if you're not a member of Climate Reality or not joined in yet, you don't have to be officially trained to join the climate. Just look up the Climate Reality Project, easy enough, and you can join right there. We have a training session coming up, and somebody posted that in the chat. I see I'm not going to be able to save the chat either, so I don't know about how that's going to work. I hope we'll figure out a way to save it. I hope somebody can manage to do that. So along with this, we're trying to work. There's two huge matters coming up. Obviously, we're getting really close to the election, so two big things. We're trying to do things to help. Well, really three, I guess. The whole where Ohio is and trying to move our state in a better direction. But we're also trying to do whatever we can to support and move our country in a better direction on the environment and on climate change. So, it's a very important time for people to get involved, be active on social media. Kent, that was a great suggestion on the postcard thing. I think a postcard party would be an awesome idea. I'm writing letters for the Sierra Club myself, so there's lots of ways you can do that sort of stuff. So, and you can get involved with voting somehow. That's another big deal. The Climate Reality Project has a thing for doing calling. A lot of different organizations are doing things about helping with calling to try to turn out the vote and that sort of thing. So any activity you can do along those directions would be great too.
I ask the representative a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Representative Smith, I'm David Hughes, a longtime anti-nuclear activist from Madison, Ohio area. I grew up with 4 miles from the Perry nuclear plant. I have the schedule of the routine venting out of that plant from the off-gas building. Those plants are not clean energy. And what I'm worried about is HB6 gives First Energy $150 million a year because they've made the case that it's clean energy. And people keep pushing that myth, and it's not true. And I'm just wondering, if they repeal HB6, then they're going to be pressuring to get that money back to First Energy in another new bill. Am I right or not?
Well, I mean, it's entirely possible. And thank you, David, for the question. And again, I would say two things. One, I'm happy to kind of continue to have discussions with this group as the House bill, as the repeal fight unfolds. Again, I think the most promising piece of legislation is the Senate bill, just because it's already got enough sponsors that it could pass today. And one final thing, because again, we're right up against 8 o'clock, is First Energy might be the most poorly run company in the state of Ohio. Ohio kind of decoupled from its generation market in 2000. Allowing competition. And since then, First Energy's been given $10 billion by the Ohio General Assembly. And somehow they were in bankruptcy. I mean, it's just mind-blowing to me. I mean, in the end, this is not on the Ohio legislature to keep these two plants alive. Capitalism being what it is, if you make really stupid economic decisions, then you might end up paying the economic price. First Energy continues to want to capitalize their profits, socialize their losses, and because they give so much money on Capitol Square, they're able to get just enough votes to be able to do it.
Thank you so much, Representative Smith. We don't want to hold you because we know you have another meeting to attend. But thank you so much. And just to let everybody know, this meeting will be recorded, so it can be accessed again. We'll have to figure out how, but we will post it for additional reviews. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Representative.
Yeah, it was great. Let's do it again.
Love to.
I've actually signed up for I'm trying to sign up for the Climate Reality training myself.
Awesome.
I'm going to go back virtually. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks very much for your activism.
Good night.
Good night.
Have a good night.